Welcome to the Naked Architect Series 3, presented to you by the Architects Registration Board of Victoria in association with Open House Melbourne and ArchiTeam. I'm Rebecca Naughton, I'm from ArchiTeam, and today we're at the Rhythm House with Delia Teschendorff from Delia Teschendorff Architecture and Tim, who is our homeowner today. Thank you very much for having us here.
Sorry.
So maybe we could start by talking about a little bit about your engagement, and maybe Tim, you can talk a little bit about how you found Delia.
Well, I found probably Delia about 6 or so years ago, one Easter, when we needed something to be done to our house, and I looked up 3 architects. I was mainly wanting to get someone local, and I got 3 different responses. Delia's was the most prompt that came back, and from the outset, the engagement and the wanting to understand the brief became apparent to me that this would be a good working relationship.
Mm-hmm. So how did you feel about what were your first services? Are you doing some design work? Or?
Yeah, so Tim contacted me with what I found to be a very fascinating brief. So I was pretty keen to get the job.
Yeah.
And he was quite open about the fact that he was talking to other architects as well. And it just really interested me, that whole concept of a home that's also has the capacity to be a musical space and an acoustically designed space as well. Yeah, and it just seemed like a very fun brief.
How did you build the brief together? You were in collaboration, or was it done before you met with Delia?
Oh, well, it was probably an email. I mean, just the first response was on email, and I think I must have said something very, very briefly about what we were after, and we had a meeting. And then I think from after that initial meeting, then Delia really sprung into action in terms of, okay, I really want to know more about Tim and Sigrid and the family and what they're after. And that's when she really wanted to know about, okay, you're musicians, and then tell me about all the songs that, that inspire you, or send me some stuff. So I sent about 25 YouTube clips of various strange genres that I liked and myself and Sigrid liked, and I think that seemed to strike a chord with Delia in terms of I understand more about the clients now, and I understand they've given me the brief function of what they're trying to do with the rehearsal space. So that really started to explode from there. I think in terms of the creative relationship, really.
There's some complexity in the design, a lot of rigour. Who were you working with? You need some consultants.
Yeah. So it did require a structural engineer, and I was keen to minimise the trades on site. So it's timber construction throughout, and I worked with a structural engineer who specialises in timber engineered design, and they even have their own timber engineering company. So they actually make the portal frames. So the home is designed as a series of portal frames. An acoustic engineer was required because one of the requirements of the brief was that a full band could play in this space and the neighbours not be disturbed, but also that the quality of sound would be good enough to record. So that made me think, okay, we definitely need some specialist input here, and we used Marshall Day acoustic engineers. And the structural design, the portal frames lent themselves really well to the acoustic design in terms of, you have to have a faceted space. You can't have many surfaces that, sound can reflect off, and I mean, it was a real learning process for me, but an exciting one, having those consultants involved. Yeah.
And then when you first took on the project, you started off by doing a bit of research and everything, then what kind of regulatory environment did you have to research to start the project?
So from the outs, I mean, some initial discussions with the brief were that possibly the house would be demolished and we'd do a new build. But in early discussions with council, it became apparent that there was a heritage overlay. So the front existing house had to be retained. And that then informed the design in terms of it would be an extension that sort of followed the terrain of the site, and we took advantage of an existing garage that was at the rear of the property to put a 2-storey garage studio and actually tie the two buildings together. And yeah, so meetings with council were required and the heritage planner to make sure that the design met those requirements.
Clearly, Delia's got a lot of experience in dealing with the planners and everything. But Tim, for you, as being someone who was new to the whole process, how did Delia help you navigate through all of that?
She was absolutely essential, really, because effectively she was outlining the process at every step of the way, whether it be engaging specialists like the acoustic engineers, or when we came into some problems in terms of getting the approvals, okay, where to from here?
And so the role of an architect is to monitor quality, and I mean that's very clear that there's a great quality and longevity in this design. It was completed 5 years ago and it still looks like it could have been moved in yesterday, but you've also got time and then budget. How did you deal with monitoring the budget for this project?
Yeah, look, I think the consultants were involved in that process as well. So obviously, we had a QS, a quantity surveyor, engaged in concept design stage to get a sort of a realistic understanding of what the budget would be for a project of this complexity. But then once that budget was set and the clients approved that budget, I then needed to work with the consultants to make sure that budget was sort of kept to, basically. So working with the structural engineer, designing a construction system that was actually cost efficient. So there was a real cost efficiency, not only in the choice of material, but also the construction system of portal frames meant that the construction could happen in that respect quite quickly, like a Meccano set in a way. And also with the acoustic engineer, I mean, the acoustics could have been incredibly complex and incredibly expensive, and obviously I had to monitor the budget in that respect. So the acoustic engineer worked to the budget requirements as well. So it does meet the acoustic requirements, but we went with double glazing rather than triple glazing. Right. We could have gone triple layer walls. We went for double layer walls because they still met the acoustic requirements and also not controlling sound to the neighbours. But that meant we were within budget. So, and then, I mean, that goes through all things in terms of material choices and me sort of assisting the clients through that process as well to make sure that all internal, external materials, lighting, fittings, fixtures, everything is working to a budget. Yes. So I guess that's my role, to make sure that I'm constantly checking everything against that budget to make sure it's meeting that. Yes. But also being open with the clients all along in terms of where there may be potential additional expenses and explaining that they're things that have to happen, need to be absorbed, etc.
Maybe Tim can talk a little bit about how you dealt with the budget for landscaping, because it's important to have like that holistic approach. And I've heard about the sun once it hits the west, and there's light dappling into this area, and how there's a kind of something musical just about that. And how did Delia handle that one?
Well, Delia recommended a good contractor to look at what we needed to do, and I must admit that it wasn't. I was focused on. We did put some money aside, but I was focused on the build, that going successful, and move-in date in some ways, because it was extended a little bit due to the fact that we had some delay to getting the approval, but I think it was actually a wise choice of actually hitting that at the same time. Well, the builders were still finishing off final parts, and then the landscaper had pretty much run into the site, right? And then we got that done. So it was all happening. So it was a pretty exciting time, really, because we were coming into this beautiful house, and the garden was transforming itself. You know, within the first 3 weeks or so of us being in here, so we could see all that happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think that advice to Tim and Sigrid from a very early stage to keep some money aside for landscaping was good advice, because it meant that not only were they moving into a beautiful house, they had a beautiful landscape to look out onto at the same time, rather than dirt, and then that just staying dirt for years, which can sometimes happen. It all evolved at the same time, and it was done and completed, and I think they could then appreciate that advice was good advice in the end. Yeah.
So Delia, when you had the heritage overlay to deal with, what other kind of regulatory things did you have to deal with?
Right. Look, there's res code, but with the planning application, the heritage permit, res code wasn't covered within that. So that was dealt with by another consultant, which Tim and Sigrid engaged, following my advice, and that was the building surveyor. So the building surveyor assessed all the documents. By this point we had a planning permit, and he recommended to us that we would need to apply for some dispensations for the project, because we were building right to the street with the new studio, a dispensation to not have the usual setback. We were building walls on boundaries, the full length of the rear of the property. So there were a few side and rear setback dispensations that we needed to apply through council, and the building surveyor felt confident that we'd get those, and because basically there were no objections with any neighbours to the building. It sits on basically a corner site and a laneway, so really the project doesn't affect anyone's amenity in a negative manner. So we applied for those dispensations through council, and they were not approved. Okay. So that took us into a stressful moment of the project, and then it became apparent that we'd need to engage a town planning consultant to help negotiate that phase of the project. I felt that a town planning consultant would be really good to help us defend and appeal those knockbacks from council. So that meant I needed to then explain to Tim and Sigrid what our options were here. So there were two options. We either accept the knockback of the dispensations, go back to the drawing board and make some changes to the design, or appeal those knockbacks and take it to the Building Appeals Board.
Right, okay.
Now, Tim and Sigrid were really happy with the design, felt that this was crazy, that these dispensations weren't being approved, and felt that it was worth taking it to the Building Appeals Board. So we engaged a town planning consultant to help us through that process, and their skills were really valued at that point in time. And look, we took it to the Building Appeals Board and we won. Oh. So every council decision, dispensation that was knocked back was overturned, and the project could proceed. Look, what that did mean was that there was a delay in getting started on site, but you know, it was worth it in the long run. It was worth fighting for those dispensations and having that overturned, because really they were important elements to the design and the project. And one of the important things that the town planner in his argument was saying is that it's good design, it's actually contributing to the neighbourhood, it's enhancing the streetscape. It's not affecting anyone's amenity. We have been granted a heritage permit. It should be going ahead, and council should be approving these dispensations. Yeah. So the Building Appeals Board agreed with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Things don't always go according to plan.
No.
It's part of the role of the architect is to kind of manage that expectation.
Yeah.
And how did you find that whole process, Jen?
Look, I thought that was wonderfully dealt with. Look, and Delia kept us informed all along the way, and actually was over prepared for the the plan B. So I remember the conversations and the emails at that time saying, look, it's all been knocked back, and apart from our jaws collectively falling, you were already working on what can I tweak and so you already had in Delia's mind what an alternate design. We would have lost rooms and the thing like that. So, but she was already thinking of that. But at the same time, leaving the decision up to us, and it was an informed decision, right? Because we'd seen all the work that Delia had done through the heritage planner, and it was a very I found it a very easy decision anyway. And Sigrid and I both came to that view. This is logical. This needs to happen, and I can't see any reason why. Especially with the precedents around of various different builds over various eras, and what they're saying can't be. There's no logical reason as to why it just seems to fall outside the template, if you like. So.
And I think sometimes, architecture does push boundaries, architecture takes risks, and I think that's a really important thing design should do as well.
Yes.
So when you're up against that sort of bureaucratic narrow-mindedness, I think you need to fight it.
Yeah. Well, it was definitely worth fighting for.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having us today, and Delia, it is a beautiful design, and it really has it's someone's home. We can really feel that, and I thank you as well for having us here today, and Sigrid as well. And I know that you're going to create some amazing memories in this home, and as the backdrop to a lot of performance. So thank you very much.
Thank you.